All right, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. My senior research project is on the effects of testing length on fatigue during time testing. To start off with a little bit about me, my name is Dallas Younger. I'm a student at Tunstall High School. I am planning on attending the University of Virginia to pursue a major in biology. So why this project? Education is a significant part of today's world and a requirement for almost any field of study that you want to go into. Within school, one of the most important components of education is testing. My personal experience observing others struggle with testing in school led me to choose testing and specifically fatigue as my topic. Studies have also shown that there has been a gradual increase of fatigue in the students of modern day society and that the average level of sleep that adolescents are getting is much lower than it used to be. The first component of testing fatigue is time on task. When it comes to time on task, my research of literature found a gap in the field. Some studies, such as Jensen et al., supported the conclusion that increased testing length increases the amount of fatigue a test taker feels and consequently decreases their testing score. Other studies have a similar conclusion, however, look at the debate in a different perspective. They look at it from the perspective that shorter testing lengths limit the amount of time that fatigue has to build and increases the student's testing score prospectively. Another study that I found, Severson et al., refuted both of these arguments and found that longer exam lengths increases a student's average SAT score. This debate demonstrates the gap in the field because the current literature does not support any one conclusion about true effects of testing length on performance. The second main factor of testing fatigue is motivation. The argument around motivation based on time, derived from Ackerman and Camphor, is that as tests get longer, the student's motivation during testing begins to dwindle. The subject itself can also be another factor that plays into motivation. If a student is taking a test in which they are particularly well versed in, then fatigue will be less likely to occur. It is also found that when participants realized that they had become fatigued during testing, their motivation fell in response to this recognition. It is important to realize that the definition of fatigue that I use within this study is the tiredness resulting from mental exertion. While motivational factors help combat fatigue, there are also other factors which cause fatigue. It is argued within the field that long testing lengths cause fatigue to build up within the subject and affect their performance on a long-term setting. It is also important to realize that fatigue is easier to build within people who aren't as motivated within that specific subject matter because they don't like it. And the last but arguably most important factor which affects fatigue is sleep. Sleep is the method in which we use in order to reset our daily fatigue. When coming off of a poor night's sleep, it is shown that testing fatigue will build up quicker than in those who got a proper night's rest. All of my research led me to this question. What is the effect of different testing lengths on fatigue during different intervals of time testing? It made me wonder whether shorter or longer testing lengths were truly beneficial. The hypothesis for my study is, if there are differences between the intervals of a similar test, then the shortest testing length will show the greatest results. My null hypothesis basically states that there is no difference between testing lengths when it comes to performance. I had some different variables to deal with throughout the duration of my study. The variable in which I was manipulating is the length and time given for each of the tests that the participants take. The dependent or responding variable is the results of the test that I gave the participants. I also included a control test for each participant by giving them an untimed test in which they had as much time as they would like to complete a 200-question arithmetic test. The conditions in which I made STOR stay constant throughout the study included the level of light of the classroom, the time of day, the order of the test, the breaks between testing used to reset their fatigue, and even the testing materials themselves. My first step in conducting my senior research project was obtaining consent from not only my participants, but also from Pennsylvania County Schools and Piedmont Regional Governor School Administration. After that, I gathered the materials needed to conduct my SRP, and because of my topic of testing, the biggest cost was just the paper and ink needed to print out the many testing booklets. During my testing sessions, I instructed my participants when exactly to begin their testing, as well as revealed the amount of time that they had left to complete the tests. I also instructed the participants to stop, and when the time ran out, took up their tests. Afterwards, I gave my participants a post-test survey to fill out. This was in order to account for any lurking variables or to give reasons as to why a participant performed the way that they did. I then debriefed the participants as to what the purpose of my study was and thanked them for their time. I graded the test, compiled the raw data, and conducted a statistical analysis on this using Excel. I decided to conduct a one-way ANOVA test on the data found during my testing. The results of this test found a p-value of 0.02, which fell within the 5% confidence interval, which means that my null hypothesis is rejected. Here's a graph which shows the average scores of my 3 different testing groups. I chose a bar graph in order to clearly show the difference between the different testing lengths. It is clearly shown that there is a significant difference between the 1-minute testing length and all of the other groups. The error bars show that the difference is significant because there is no overlap between them. This chart lists the number of questions that were used for each of my individual tests, and it also gives the data values for my untimed control test, which showed the best results out of any of the tests. The percentage of missed questions is a more reliable data set to look at due to the fact that my 1-minute and 15-minute test had a different number of questions available and missed. From the results of my study, at the 0.05 level of significance, it can be concluded that the testing length significantly affected the results of an arithmetic test. Within my different testing groups, the shorter 1-minute test outperformed the other testing lengths in terms of testing average, which supports the fact that tests should be shorter in order to decrease fatigue and purposefully increase student score when it comes to arithmetic and low-level math. There's a significant difference found within my data. However, this does not mean that each of my testing groups was found to be different from each other. The 1-minute testing group is the reason why that significant difference was found, and my 5 to 15-minute testing intervals were not significant from each other. My study has several different applications to the real world. The first being the advancement of the field of education by allowing teachers to understand the best way to help their students. The second application is to foster confidence in young children who may struggle with time testing, which reduces the chances of these young students developing an aversion to mathematics from a young age. And finally, to help the testing measurement be as accurate as possible. Long and arduous tests measure a student's cognitive endurance instead of their true cognitive ability. Once a student or test taker has become fatigued, it is shown that they are no longer performing to the best of their abilities. Like any study, my study had several limitations which restrict the scope in which the results will be applicable. The most glaring limitation of my study is that its results only include arithmetic testing. If this study were to be run with another subject area, the results may be different. Another limitation has to do with the speed of testing. If the speed of testing was set to be lower, then it is possible that the test takers' stamina may have actually outlasted the effects of fatigue. My participants were also all pulled from a similar area, so the lack of geographical diversity within my sample should be questioned. And found by my post-test survey, the average level of mathematics scores taken by my students was higher compared to random samples of all Americans, meaning that my study is only applicable to current upper-level high school students. There are many implications regarding future research that can be found within my study. Future studies which have to do with time testing should use my study as a reference when creating their test and deciding their specific testing lengths. During my study, I found an important area that also needed further research. This area is how the speed of cognition influences the speed in which participants can complete mental arithmetic. The speed of cognition may also have effects on how fast fatigue begins to influence the participants. Future studies should realize that fatigue may affect their results and take this into consideration while building their test. Study has also shown that there are limitations to testing which should be taken into consideration for not only arithmetic testing, but any type of mental cognition. During the process of conducting my senior research project, I honed many of my skills in real-life applications. I developed skills related to the research process, and I also made use of statistical methods that I learned in class. And finally, I gained experience in the creation of experimental design, as well as realized just how complex and thorough the research process must be in order to be of use to the field. I would like to thank several people for helping and allowing me to complete this study. I want to thank Dr. Bocock for approving my topic and allowing me to work with participants. I also want to give a thank to my participants that allowed me to complete the study and took the test. I also want to give a special thanks to Ms. Long for guiding me through the entire research process, providing material about specific statistical tests, and helping rethink certain aspects of my study. I also want to thank Mr. Bray for allowing me to use his classroom at Tunstall to conduct my study. Do you have any questions for me today? Ms. Martin?
Yes, sir. So, how did you come up with the 40 questions a minute?
Ms. Martin's asking me how I came up with the 40 questions a minute. And I looked up the average number of characters that a human should be able to process, and I calculated how many characters each arithmetic problem had been able to, and based it upon that. And that's why I scaled my other questions and tests to have the same speed in which they were supposed to complete the problems.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Sanchez?
I have a question. So at the beginning, you were talking about how sleep plays a role in, how fast you are able to process things. Do you think that, the amount of sleep that each of your participants got, the night before may have played a role or, skewed your results if that wasn't a controlled variable?
Ms. Sanchez is asking about the amount of sleep possibly being a lurking variable within my study. And I did include the amount of sleep that they had on my post-test survey the night before. And it was not a variable that skewed because my participants got a relatively normal amount of sleep. Ms. Ashford?
To continue on with the sleep, did you consider teenagers have biologically a delayed sleep preference at high school age? That, they like to stay up later, compared to other people that, don't get up as early in the morning. Did that play in?
Ms. Ashworth is asking about how my specific population that I was testing of teenagers may have affected the results of my test. And when I was looking at the average amount of sleep that a teenager got, I was using the statistics for teenagers and not adults or anything in general. So I don't believe that it played a major role in it, although it could possibly have if my participants had gotten
You considered it and adjusted for it, so very well, thank you.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes. Did you make aware to your participants the number of questions that they were going to have to answer in that time frame?
Mr. Taylor is asking me if I made my participants aware of the number of questions that they were answering in that time frame. And before each test, I did tell them the exact number of questions on that test and the amount of time they had to complete it.
Did anybody walk away when you said 600 questions?
Nobody walked away, however, they did know that it was about to be an arduous test.
Mm-hmm.
How did you come up with the questions that were on the test?
Dr. South is asking me how I came up with the questions that were on my test. And I used the basic 1 through 12 scales, and it was completely randomly generated within a number generator.